Great. Thanks, Tyler. So I'm going to be walking through a couple of projects that I worked on at the New York Times uh, using sort of open transit data. If you sort of rewind back to 2 years ago is the summer of hell for the subway. And we were sort of curious at like quantifying that. Is it like true that the subway is worse than it's ever been before? So some of my colleagues pulled open subway data and just the on-time performance statistics you can see dropped pretty dramatically over time. And looking at trying to like figure out what the cause was, they also looked at some statistics published in the MTA's board books at the cause of delay. And based on their published numbers, it seemed pretty clear. Subways have slowed down because they're too crowded. And so the Times wrote a piece about it, and there's a nice video showing just exactly how crowded the subways are. Um, this got a lot of pushback on sort of transit Twitter. People were like, well, ridership has been flat for the last 5 years, and on-time performance was a lot better in 2013. So it's like kind of a chicken and egg problem. If the subways are crowded, they'll run slower, but what causes subways to be more crowded in the first place? And I was sort of reading this reaction and curious, and I decided to like try to dig into this a little bit. One of the things people were saying was that the MTA wasn't running as many trains as it used to. This is sort of hard to quantify. They don't put out any numbers in their published delay statistics. Let me make this a little bit bigger. But one thing that they do publish is the feed for that powers the countdown clocks. And getting actual train sort of travel times out of that is a little bit tricky. They basically just publish the information that you see in the countdown clock. So to infer that like a one train has stopped at South Ferry, you have to scrape the feed every couple of seconds and sort of impute that when a train was 1 minute away 2 seconds ago, and then 5 seconds later, there's just a train that's 7 minutes away. You can sort of infer that a train showed up. Uh, this is like really convoluted and a little bit tricky to get right, but we kind of kept plugging away at it, and we did find when you compare the what the MTA's published schedule is to the number of trains that they're actually able to run during rush hour, they were basically never meeting the kind of their target, which it's like, oh, so that's why the trains are crowded, because there's less trains than they used to be. But there's sort of a question that arises like immediately after that, which is like, well, why can't they run as many trains as they used to? And the going back to the published delay statistics, they're really not that helpful, right? It just says overcrowding, which isn't a root cause. And sort of hearing from like people inside the MTA, we were hearing that like overcrowding is just sort of a catch-all category. If the train shows up late to the terminal, like the numbers just basically come from the train operators, and they're like, I don't know why it's late. It looked like it was pretty crowded, but we're late, so I'm gonna write down overcrowded. So to sort of do that root cause analysis, I wanted to kind of look farther back in time. One of the things that we had heard was that new signal timers designed to make the subway safer by basically ensuring that trains were kept farther apart than they used to be, were actually causing, every time one of these was installed, it increased traveling time a little bit. And so I wanted to go back in time and sort of look over the last 5 years at all the times signal timers were installed. Unfortunately, the countdown clock feed, to have that information, you have to be grabbing it in real time. The MTA does publish, or they claim to publish, sort of historical data, but it is only available in 5-minute snapshots, which isn't quite the temporal resolution you need to kind of do that imputing of motion. And they stopped publishing it in 2015. So there's a pretty big gap there. And I ended up not being able to sort of use the available open data when I went and did a follow-up article looking at these signal timers. I had to rely on sort of internal MTA analysis that people were leaking to me, and it's pretty dramatic. It would be great if like we could see this with open data and sort of diagnosis without having to wait for someone inside of the MTA to have time and be given permission to do this analysis, show it to their bosses, be ignored for a year, and then finally leak it to the New York Times. Um, and another thing that I was sort of curious about was like the sort of system level effect of these delays. So there's sort of a you can imagine this space of like a sort of safety versus speed trade-off, and I wanted to kind of quantify that and sort of understand it. But because I didn't have access to the raw logs of like how the trains were actually moving, I ended up building this toy simulation of the subway system, and you can kind of see each of these lines is a single kind of represents a one train traveling through time and space, and you can sort of control the parameters of like how safe do you want the system to be, and then like see how that impacts the number of trains that are able to move through it, which was fun to build, but it would have been great to do this with actual data. um, and so one thing that we like a natural follow-up that would be interesting to ask is did removing these signal timers did it work? Because they've been going through and reassessing and recalibrating them in the last year. And I don't know how well y'all can see that. Oh, that's pretty big. Great. Um, On-time performance is recovering. It's looking good, but it's measured only against the kind of the scheduled time it takes to get from the beginning of a train trip to the very end. So if you remember, they weren't as able to run as many trains on the 456 as they are on the schedule, which causes all sorts of problems with merging and branching and cascading delays. So they rewrote the kind of like they added a couple of minutes to the expected runtime for the 4 and 5, which results in more trains getting to the end of the line on time. Which is like it's good that they're having a schedule that reflects what's operationally possible, but it also makes it impossible for outsiders to really determine if like are the trains better or not. They're not doing an apples to apples comparison, and with sort of historic data, you would be able to answer these questions. Just another example of stuff you can do with it. This was I so I'm no longer working at the Times. I just started at Google back in December, but I was sort of like interested in the impact of like the L train shutdown and uh, not paying attention to news, and I realized it was happening in 3 days. So I booted this thing up, which is kind of tracing the paths of trains in real time in a similar way to the diagram, but the feed's like sort of broken and janky in all sorts of unexpected ways. You can see here's a train that like moves backwards, which hopefully did not happen. But dealing with this feed is a lot of work, and uh, if we had quality sort of actual historic movement data, it also opens up so we could do more sort of human understandable statistics than on-time train performance. We can conduct analysis of like what the L train is doing, and we can also do like this beautiful arc that one of my former colleagues, Amanda Cox, did, which is showing just this is for commuter rails, and it's showing the instead of like distance being like actual distance, it's how far it takes to get somewhere. And you could plug in actual train travel times to kind of make this map grow and shrink with service delays, which I think would be both a useful tool and like a great illustration of how trains being slow like make us literally farther apart from each other. Um, this is also like deeply frustrating to deal with because the MTA has better internal data. They actually know where the trains are for uh, the L and the 7 with CBTC. The other numbered lines have a ATS, and so this position data exists. They're just not publishing it. If you work in the MTA and want to talk to me about what would be helpful, that would be amazing. But if you don't, I'm sort of just collecting. People have like worked on this piecemeal, grabbing snapshots, and then like realizing it starts to take up hundreds of gigabytes of data, and then your server fails, and we're not as fancy as the previous speaker's companies. So it's all sort of piecemeal. But if you're interested in like making this more accessible to a wider audience and sort of figuring out how to work with this data, please get in touch with me. Thank you.
I'll do 2 questions.
What do you see? Sorry. No, this is just on my GitHub. I'd be happy to work with someone else though. Yeah. Oh. I had some like kind of initially good conversations back when I was at the Times, and then the PR people kind of put a stop to that, and now no one's responding to my emails, at least officially. But yeah.
How long did it take to get that subway, the delay, visualization, and also the one for the time, and also is management at times like very much understand how long does it take?
So I kind of have a background doing these interactive charts, and it's really it's only like a couple of hundred lines of code to make it. I banged it out over Thanksgiving break, but the graphics desk sort of I like dug up a lot of the story, had a bunch of stuff leaked to me, and they wanted it to be sort of like a graphics desk did the story by themselves. So the what actually took a lot more time was like reporting out this 2,000 word story and like getting it to the standards of the times. But yeah, they're supportive and understand that things are hard.
All right. Any other? Oh, okay, Lauren. You got it.
Yeah. S- So it's if you look at the other tabs, like I mean, I don't think major. I have a lot of problems with major incidents. Like, I won't. It only measures like 5% of delays. It's like doesn't really make that much sense. But the bigger problem is the older ones don't go back historically nearly as far. They just were offered like in 2015. The other ones, the MTA has been publishing on-time performance and weighted assessment have been published for over a decade. So you can actually do overtime comparisons. Yeah, definitely. I'm very glad the MTA is publishing them. But like if we want to look back to how were the subways doing in 2005, we have to use on-time performance. Or you could publish the like the ATS logs, and the Times would be happy to reconstruct those other statistics back in time.
And with that, thank you very much.